Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, for the chance to be here today and return after a year from our first conversation about service. I am grateful to you for sharing this time, and it's my hope and prayer there will be something of value here for you. Before we jump in, 3 quick acknowledgements that are equally important. The first is a land acknowledgement to remind us that no matter where we are sitting today, we must remember that long before our community was here, there were thriving peoples, cultures, and traditions. These cultures tried to teach us how to steward our land, our water, and our air. Now, unfortunately, we did a terrible job at listening to their wisdom, and our environment is now paying that price. Even worse, we have not acknowledged that our communities are literally built on top of these cultures. We cannot hide from the social, emotional, and economic damage this has done to generations of families across Canada. It's important for us to recognize the strength of our community today comes from those who were here before us. And it's our responsibility to remind future generations that they are part of a continuum of leadership, respect, and community that started with Indigenous cultures. Simply put, truth has to come before reconciliation. Our second acknowledgement is a personal one. I was born white, male, middle class in Southern Ontario in the 1970s. When you combine that with the fact that I'm happily married to my beautiful wife, Melanie, I check just about every box of privilege there is. This means that my journey to our screens today has likely been radically different than many of yours. Where doors have opened for me just because of the way I look, those same doors may have closed to you for the same reason. Please know that while I can never understand what that is like, this difference in how we've been treated angers me and has inspired my career to help other voices sing just as loud as mine. If there are learning opportunities for me today in watching and understanding my privilege, I welcome your feedback and I am grateful for your grace. Our third acknowledgement is that we are over a year now of living through a global pandemic. And I don't know about you, but for me, there have been a real mix of days since last March. Some good, some okay, some really quite terrible. If today is a good day for you and the sun is shining and you're joining our time of worship with joy in your heart, I want you to know how welcome you are and how excited I am to learn with you today. If today isn't such a good day and the sun isn't shining and the weight of it all seems overwhelming, I want you to know that I'm also glad you're with us today. You are not alone in how you're feeling, and it's okay to be in the place you are. No matter how any of us are feeling today, it's my hope and prayer that there are more sunny days on the way. Now, speaking of the pandemic, my Netflix consumption has increased just a little since last March. In fact, our family has measured much of the past year by the shows we have watched. First, it was the Tiger King phase, where we just couldn't turn away from the train wreck that was Joe Exotic. We then rewatched Community as a way to remember that people in confined emotional spaces can in fact get along and forgive one another. The musical Hamilton was a big moment for us and gave us lots of singing with and without the professionals. And I'll let you guess which sounded better. We then switched over to a number of documentaries that explored animal habitats, mountain climbing, even movie making. After that, Space Force brought us a smile to our faces, as did #BlackAF, which made us laugh and feel guilty at the same time. My latest viewing recommendation for Netflix has had a profound impact on my thoughts about how we are being called into service. The show is called Amend, the Fight for America, and it is about the American 14th Amendment to their Constitution. It is a powerful docuseries produced and narrated by the ridiculously handsome and talented Will Smith. You have to watch this docuseries that explores the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It opens our eyes to the champions and challengers of this cornerstone of U.S. democracy. Now, a quick history lesson that I wouldn't have been able to give before watching the show. The 14th Amendment is part of the U.S. Constitution, and it was ratified by the U.S. Senate in 1868. It granted citizenship to all citizens born or naturalized in the United States, including formerly enslaved people. It also gave everyone in the U.S. equal protection under the laws. It was originally intended to help the U.S. heal after the Civil War, and its impact has been significant for so many groups and voices since then. The show explains how the 14th Amendment has been a source of pain and hope for millions of Americans of color and other marginalized groups who are simply looking for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness promised to them by the U.S. Declaration of Independence. Now, I'll be honest with you here. Amend has caused me real discomfort. Multiple times during each episode, I am squirming in my seat, feeling overwhelmed by the 2x4 of truth that is being smashed across my forehead. Amend proves that my life has been a walk in the park and oppression-free just because of the way I look. As a Christian, this shakes me to my core as I begin to truly understand the massive difference in the life I have led compared to the marginalized communities that Amend profiles. And like many of you, I'm wondering how I can be a part of a solution. And while it's not the only thing I can do to help build a more equitable world, which was the hope for the 14th Amendment, equity, I'm clearly hearing God's call to share my exploration about what it means to be in service to others, which is why I am so grateful to be back today and share some of my reflections. This past year's challenged my thinking about what it means to be a Christian and what the role of the church should be. It's also taught me to look long and hard about what I'm actually in service to, because as it turns out, that may not be so clear. So without boring you too much, a quick reminder of the learning journey I'm on. In March of 2020, days before the global pandemic was declared, I launched a site called 4simplewords.ca. It was a public declaration of the personal and professional benefits I've enjoyed by embracing this idea of being a servant to others. Wanting to share this magic with my friends and colleagues on my 50th birthday, I arrogantly put it out into the world. Could being a servant help others as much as it had helped me? Wouldn't that be the ultimate act of service, sharing the power of being a servant? I mean, talk about meta. Or not. The pushback from my friends and community on this was fast and strong. They told me that servant was a big, complicated, and unless you looked like me, unapproachable word. Humbled by that honest and truthful feedback, I began reading, thinking, and talking with hundreds of people about what it means to be in service to others. And nearly a year after listening, reflecting, and writing, we launched this concept of service leadership as a way we can look after ourselves, support those around us, and inspire meaningful change. Now, I won't spend any time on that today, but I do invite you to visit us at 4simplewords.ca to learn more. So what was it about the label servant that was so hard for others, yet such a natural thing for me to embrace? It's clear the word servant was very complicated for many and created an imbalance that felt disingenuous or even oppressive. It was especially unapproachable for leaders who identified as female, Black, brown, Indigenous, or part of the LGBTQ community. We heard loud and clear that equity and servant are two words that do not belong together. No one wants to be a servant when the systems you push against daily already perceive you that way. Let's have another quick learning moment to remind ourselves what equity really means, because we're going to come back to this. Imagine for me, if you can, 3 kids standing behind a fence trying to watch a baseball game. The first is tall enough to look over, and can see all the action. The second is a little shorter and can just see, but not really. The third child is much shorter and can't see the field at all behind the fence. Now, an oversimplified version of what equity looks like is this idea that the first child doesn't need any help. The middle child gets a small box, and the third child gets a tall box. The end result is their three heads are relatively level, and they all get to enjoy the game. Some got more than others, resulting in this elusive idea called equity. Everyone living that experience to their fullest. True equity, of course, would have been buying all three kids tickets for the game and inviting them into the stadium, but we'll have that conversation another time. So it's easy for me as the white, straight male to say that I'm acting as a servant to others when every system in our society has been designed to suit my needs. I am the tall kid who can look over the fence on his own. In fact, I get to feel pretty darn good about myself declaring my commitment to servitude. But clearly, when it comes to being in service to others, the word servant is out of touch with our modern world and threatens the church's relationship with it. So now I'm torn. What my traditional faith has taught me is in direct conflict to what I'm hearing an equitable world demands of us today. And for the past while, this has had my head spinning. Is being a servant like Christ not the ultimate way to serve those around me? Am I being oppressive to others when I invite them to be a servant? Spoiler alert, yes, I am. How could this idea that our church has so profoundly grounded itself in, be a servant like Christ, be so disconnected from the reality of the world? So honestly, this pushback did not sit well with me. As a Christian, I always thought I had the inside track on what it meant to be a good leader. Be a servant like Christ, we've been told over and over. The Bible, the church, even modern authors tell us to be a servant and you're good to go. It's all very easy. Forget yourself, focus on others, keep your head down. Wash those feet. But that servant mindset does not work in our modern world, especially if we really want to connect with others. We need to stop asking people to be servants, those who are subjugated to the demands of others, and instead invite people to be in service to others, which is an intentional partnership of equals. Servant in service to others. Servant in service to others. It's a subtle and really important mind shift that I think we need to embrace. Some help in this transition may be found in a question that we've uncovered from our research at Four Simple Words. With honesty and courage, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what am I in service to? No, really, what am I really in service to? The answer is usually not what we think at first and tells us a lot about ourselves and those we are wanting to serve. Now let's think about that as a faith community. What are we in service to as Christians when we want others to be servants? Boldly, I think it is our limited worldview rather than what the world really needs or what Jesus is asking us to do. I think inviting others to be a servant rather than be in service to others is both ignorant and foolish. We need to have the courage to understand the word servant in the context of our modern times and not be surprised that an invitation framed around our needs is not going to be appreciated or welcomed. 2,000 years ago, the word servant actually translated to slave and referred to a human being who was owned or controlled by someone else. Slaves were very much an accepted part of the family, community, and economic systems in Christ's time. Today, not at all, officially anyway. One of the most famous biblical references about being a servant is that story about Christ washing disciples' feet. I think the scripture allows us to step back from the word servant and then focus on what we want to be in service to. John 13, verses 12 to 15 reads like this, and I'm sure you've heard this before. When he'd washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If then I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done for you." Now, as a Christian, I get excited and, to be honest, pretty relieved by the word example in that scripture. I think it's permission to acknowledge that we mere mortals cannot be Christ. And in fact, by ignoring this short word, I think we see how servitude from Christ has been twisted to help build our institutions, sell books, and reinforce the our way or the highway mentality that many in the church have. I respectfully offer that Jesus is asking us to follow his example, not be him. Good news, and all kidding aside, you don't have to die on a cross to serve others. So let me plant this idea. Good service isn't about being Christ. It is about humbly following his example. Getting up on the cross is not the only way as a follower of Christ, that I can serve my family, community, or even my business. With this new lens, I think we have a different mindset that allows us to separate the ultimate sacrifice from meaningful and sustainable service to others. Join me with your hands, if you don't mind, just to help us think about this. Put your hands one above the other. This is being a servant. Now put your hands next to each other. This is being in service to others. Servant in service to others. It is a subtle and really important mind shift. Now let me back that up with a few insights we've gained at foursimple.words.ca over the past year. Based on hundreds of conversations and a whole lot of research, we've discovered that true and effective service requires three things. Number one, a strong and honest self-awareness of who I am. Knowing what is important to me and understanding what makes me tick and ticks me off is the first step to good serving. To best manage my own needs, time, and energy, I have to be honest with myself about how much of each I can spare to authentically and effectively help without losing myself in the process. This allows me to serve consistently and not burn out. The second thing I need for good service is the ability to see beyond my needs. With my ego out of the way, I can shift my focus outward and actively look for needs. This is the fun part of good service. I can explore and learn and make meaningful change by being curious about how I get to be involved. And thanks to the hard and ongoing work of step one, my offer of support is coming from a place of authentic desire to see others succeed. This is where we circle back to those four magical words my grandmother shared with me. It's not about me. The third thing we need for great service is clarity on what I am in service to. And this is the tough one. This is where we have some honest conversations with ourselves. Creating a transparent partnership between myself and the idea or the person I want to serve is good for me, and it's good for them. This means that through conversation and listening and ongoing reflection, we understand how my time or skills can create meaningful impact for them. I'm serving in a way that meets their actual needs, not the way I think it may be, or even worse, what I want it to be. By this new definition, then, being in service isn't always about being nice or not talking truth to power because we might hurt someone's feelings. Being in service means that we have Christ's strength, wisdom, and courage to do what is right, not what is comfortable. So this brings us back to the questions I asked myself while watching Amend. What is right? How am I serving to build a world grounded in this idea of equity? John used the word justice this morning, and I think there's a straight line between the two. What does my personal 14th Amendment look like? What can we point to as a 14th Amendment for our faith community? As I reflect on my learnings over the past year and how they've challenged and pushed my faith, I believe Christian communities have a Christ-given obligation and responsibility to step into these messy, uncomfortable, confusing equity conversations. More than that, we need to make sure that we are not servants to old, outdated thinking about our role in equity, but instead are acting in service to those who are hungry, poor, alone, and ill. Just like the 14th Amendment had champions and challengers, so does this conversation in our faith institutions. I am so grateful that my community has pushed and expanded my thinking, allowing me to choose Christ's example of service as my personal 14th Amendment. It is the hope and responsibility I have been given to use my privilege and faith to be a champion of equity. It will be messy, it will be uncomfortable, and I will make mistakes. That mess, that discomfort, and embarrassment, however, will pale in comparison to the option of not trying to be in service to the example of Christ. Thank you all for your time today. It's been a gift to be with you.